So he's most famous for coining the term, I think, therefore I am. I'm sure everyone has heard of this before. It's one of the most famous philosophical phrases. So I like to kind of dive into what this actually means. So Descartes was a philosopher. He was also a mathematician. He was like a polymath, as most philosophers were back in the day. And he was born in 1596 and lived up till 1650. And to understand like Descartes, we need to talk about the world that he was born into. So during his time, there was a lot of religious influence. So religious thoughts dominated the day-to-day, and truth really depended on what was prophesized in the scripture. There wasn't much scientific thinking or logical thinking that didn't necessarily pervade society. And as an example, this is still the era where like people were like hunting for witches. One of the ways that they would identify a witch from a normal person, called like a swimming test, they would toss, usually a woman, right, into a body of water. And if they floated, they'd be a witch. But if they didn't, then they would be a regular person. And that's odd to think about, right? Because most people like we're filled with air, and fat it's not that dense, so you're like bound to float. It's not necessarily a very logical way to, I guess, identify a witch. And we have that intuition today because thinking about things more logically is like a natural process that our brain goes through. But that wasn't the case back then. So why this guy's significant is because he was really instrumental to, I guess, spreading rational thinking and really encourage people to question what they're learning, question the knowledge that they might have or knowledge that society might have, just being skeptical overall. And this kind of thought really resulted in the development of science and mathematics and also philosophy. So it's honestly not a stretch to say that he actually laid the groundwork for our technologically advanced society that we live in today. So that's kind of the context, right? He's kind of brought into the world where there's not much logical thinking, but he was a pretty skeptical guy, and he was really interested in finding the truth. One of the reasons why he realized that the way that people used to think about things weren't necessarily the most effective way to think about the world was because when he was going through school, he was really unsatisfied about what he was learning because there wasn't a lot of reproducibility. A lot of what like science and different studies, what they're trying to do is find some sort of truth, right? The more that you study it, you should be getting closer to the truth. And if you have identified some kind of truth, then if you follow that rule, you should be able to produce the same outcome. So for example, in math, 1 plus 1 would always be 2, no matter who does it. But what Descartes noticed was that a lot of the teachings weren't necessarily reproducible, even within just philosophy. Different philosophers were saying different things, and everyone had different ideas about the world, right? So there's no consistency, and it wasn't reproducible, like even if you followed the exact same steps. So he was questioning, is what we're learning, what we're studying, and the knowledge that we've accumulated, are any of that really reliable, or any of that bringing us closer to the truth, right? And this is actually a problem that modern day science is also facing. A lot of research is not reproducible. So who knows? We might get to the point where there's a new system of knowledge that kind of replaces science. So that was kind of like the context. He's questioning, okay, like are any of the things that we're learning right now true? So he had some frustrations. So it's not reproducible. Maybe skeptical. I guess you could say lack of logical rigor when distilling the knowledge. Based on this, based on his frustrations, do you guys have a guess on what subject he was a big fan of? Exactly. So it's math, right? He was a fan of math because it was reproducible. Like if someone memorized their mathematical equation, if they learned how to use it, they plugged in the numbers, they would always get the same result. So he wanted to kind of bring in like mathematical rigor and logical thinking to science and other like philosophy as well. He wanted to create a new starting point because he was like skeptical about any of the knowledge that's been developed to this date. He said he was gonna just start clean and identify like an absolute truth that can't be denied, start from there, and start adding a lot of like mathematical rigor into these scientific and philosophical disciplines. So then the next question was, okay, like where do we need to start? What's something that's absolutely undeniable? You could say like the color of a tree is green, but that might not necessarily be the case because your eyes could be deceiving you. So can your perceptions be trusted? So his process was whatever knowledge that there is, you want to keep questioning it and kind of breaking it down until you reach a point where you know for certain that's a truth. So if I was looking at like a cow in the distance, I might think it's a cow, but it could also be a different animal. Like my eyes could just be like deceiving me based on like the colors and whatnot. Could you also be certain that like any animal is there? There are instances like where I hear something that no one else heard. So your perceptions could be deceiving you. Your eyes might be fooling you. You don't know for sure if that cow in the distance actually exists, right? So if you can't trust your eyes, then can you really trust any of the other senses that you have? Like, can you for example, like I think a good example is like spices, right? If you eat something spicy, it feels hot, but it's actually not hot. So it's like it's fooling you. So you can't really trust your perceptions. What about like, yeah, like touch and hearing. So like sometimes you feel something that doesn't exist. Symptoms like phantom limb, like people who get amputated, they can still feel their arms even when their arms aren't there. So then if you can't trust your perceptions, can you even be certain of your own existence? And this is the point where Descartes comes to as like a starting point. And he argues that you can be skeptical of your own existence, yes, but that actually is a proof that you exist because you are able to question the existence of yourself. At least your skeptical mind exists for certain. So that's kind of like the meaning behind I think therefore I am. I thought that was pretty cool. Like I've heard of this phrase before, but I didn't really know the context behind it and what it actually meant. What he was suggesting was that I guess philosophy and science at the time, the goal, he was using like a building as an analogy. There's like some kind of truth, and what science was doing, it's kind of building up knowledge, this, and trying to get us to the truth. But he was saying that because there was no structured way of thinking and not much logical and mathematical rigor in science, there's going to be faulty understanding in each layer, and because of that, tower's it's gonna start tilting, right, like this, and it's gonna take us away from the truth. So this is what he was concerned with. So he said, okay, let's just start fresh and start from something that can be proved to be absolutely true and start building up on that and trying to use, I guess, mathematical reasoning to kind of build up knowledge and build up truth. And so he figured out that, questioning reality, questioning knowledge was key to being able to accomplish this. So he wanted to kind of lay the groundworks for like a framework on how to think. And he had a 4-step process, which was step number 1 was to clearly articulate the problem. Step number 2 was to work on one component at a time. Number 3 was solve the easy problems first. And then the 4th one was making sure you're not missing things. So applying this framework to maybe like a doctor-patient interaction would be, a patient comes in telling the doctor that they don't feel great. They're just not feeling themselves. They're feeling a little ill, and the doctor needs to, at this point, like clearly articulate the issue at hand. So he might ask the patient, "Can you tell me exactly like what kind of symptoms you're having? What part of your body hurts? Is it pain? Is it numbness? Is it dullness?" And then the patient might be like, "I have a bit of a headache. My gut hurts a little. I'm dizzy." So now he's able to identify problems, right? The problems are that he has a headache, gut problems, and he might be a little bit dizzy. And then so the next step would be to work on one component at a time. Instead of trying to solve for the dizziness, the gut problems, and the headache, maybe just focus on the gut issue. And after asking the patient a few questions, he figures out that the patient actually has a history of intestinal cancer that runs in his family. So then that's an issue, right? That could be a thing that's happening, right? He might have intestinal cancer. But that's a pretty big problem. There could be other solutions or easier problems to be solved here. So maybe he says, okay, instead of running all the cancer tests, let's just take a quick blood test. Start from there. So that's step number 3, right? Trying to start from easy problems to solve first and building it up. And that's important because if you start from the easy problems and whack one mole at a time, you're less susceptible to missing easy solutions that could have explained the problem. And then number 4, the doctor asks, have you changed your diet? What have you been eating or drinking lately? and the patient says, I've had 10 beers in the last few days, I still have a bit of alcohol left from last night, then the doctor can be like, okay, maybe you probably just have a hangover. I hope that kind of illustrates the thought process and how you should think about things. But yeah, I guess I'll leave it at that. This kind of contextualizes the way that we think about the world today. Rationality, reason, rather than like superstition, right? And Descartes was really the guy that kind of spread that. And, rational thinking, and as much as we'd like to think that we have good logic and reasoning skills, that necessarily isn't the case, right? Like, just as an example, like cigarettes were thought to be neuroprotective, right? Protective against Alzheimer's disease, dementia, Parkinson's, and up till very recently. But then we completely overlooked the fact that heavy smokers have a shorter life expectancy. So the reason why they might not be experiencing as much Parkinson's disease and Alzheimer's and dementia is because they might not be getting old enough to the point where they start experiencing those symptoms. So even in our age, there's a lot of difficulties when it comes to reproducibility of research and just a lot of things that are missing. And I think this conversation is especially relevant because of social media, right, and misinformation. I think it was Facebook, they recently decided to kind of get rid of the misinformation warning tag, right? So it's kind of a free-for-all now, right? There's no regulation, there's no fact checking. Thinking for yourself and trying to identify truth, it's a difficult process because it's a lot easier if someone can tell you what's right. It's a lot easier if you can kind of accept the information as it is and accept it as the truth, because questioning it and like being skeptical about it it's painful. It's not an easy process, but I think it's more relevant than ever. And a final thing I want to leave you with is characteristics of people who can't think rationally, right? As Descartes described it, is people who are arrogant, that they know more than they actually know, right? People who don't have resilience, people who will kind of don't want to commit the time or effort to thinking about a problem and questioning it. And also people on the other side of the spectrum who have low confidence in themselves, right? Thinking that they're not smart enough to be able to question things and be able to kind of think about it, speculate whatever information that they're being provided with, and coming up with their own solution, right? Doing research and whatnot. I think I definitely resonate with the low confidence part because maybe I feel like I'm not qualified enough, especially when it comes to like health and diet. We're always bombarded with like the newest diet fad. You should try this diet, you should try that diet, this is good for your mental health, this is good for losing weight and whatnot. And it's easy to just accept the opinions being provided by experts, right? But in reality, the experts could be completely wrong, right? There hasn't been a case in the history of science, or maybe that's an overstatement. Again, question what I'm saying. That's the whole point of this lecture. Is that, like I said, smoking. People thought smoking was healthy, right? So science is continuously evolving. Whatever experts said a century ago is most likely to have been wrong, right? We have discovered it to be wrong, or we have built on it to have a better understanding of it, right? So even if an expert tells you something, in 100 years, it is very likely that we'll find out that whatever that expert was saying was actually wrong or not nuanced enough. So that's a food for thought. Obviously, it's easier said than done, but I think it's kind of a good way to think about the world, and we're definitely lacking rational thinking in today's world, especially with AI. People can just make AI videos now, right? People can just make AI content now. And you can choose to accept it and not question it, but you also have the choice to take a moment to be like, hey, is the information I'm being provided actually legitimate? Maybe I should look into it a little bit more. I don't know. I think that makes life more interesting. It feels like you have more autonomy about what you believe, right? Rather than being force-fed things. The world that we live in today isn't necessarily optimized, or the incentives aren't necessarily optimized to spread truth, right? So just assume everything that's being shown to you is, in a sense, not true. And then I think that's a good starting point. And Descartes would very much like that. So let's make Descartes happy, I guess.